Hello friends. For today's video, I wanted to highlight my top 5 new fantasy releases, and I'm specifically going to be choosing from books that I was able to discuss within my new fantasy releases wrap-ups throughout the first quarter of the year. And if you don't know, I'm sure those of you that do are tired of hearing this, but within the first quarter of the year, as a result of the fact that it's the beginning of the year and thus a lot of new releases aren't yet out, or when they do come out, because I'll have put holds on them, I have to wait a bit before I have access to the books. That means that in the first quarter, I allow myself to pick up new fantasy from 2023, oftentimes new fantasy that came out at the end of 2023. I allow myself to count that for new fantasy within those first 3 months, and then moving forward from here on out, it will only be 2024 releases. I'll go through the list of books that I did talk about in those new fantasy releases wrap-ups so that you know what the pool of books is that I am choosing from, and then also if you do want more information about those, I'll have all of my new fantasy releases wrap-ups in the description bar down below. Foxglove, Bookshops and Bone Dust, The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, System Collapse, Warm Hands of Ghosts, Iron Flame, Tyranny of Faith, Starling House, Dark Star Burning, Ash Falls White, Cage of Dreams, Ruthless Vows, The Will of the Many, June Pharaoh, A Curse for True Love, and Map of the Otherlands. Jumping into my top 5, I'm going to kick it off with Tyranny of Faith. This is the second book in this particular series that starts with Justice of Kings, and actually the third book just came out within the first quarter, so I will likely be picking that up and discussing the end of the trilogy here within this next quarter. But I absolutely loved this second installment. I think it built upon what we got within the first, which is always what you're wanting with a sequel. I think it made me more invested in the characters, in the world, in the plot. But more than anything, I just found the political machinations and the moral conundrums that our characters are facing to be ones that the characters not only had to grapple with, but I often found myself questioning, like, what would I do in that situation, or what is the right call? I really like in fiction when it does push you to ask those tough questions, because there are instances where power is something that the characters are trying their best to never abuse. And our main character, though, is somebody where you do kind of wonder if she has a naive view of the world and what it actually takes to do the right thing, or what's best for everybody might actually go against your principles. But if you adhere to the principles, then do you damn this other group of people over here? And you as the reader, you have your own personal connections to characters or your own thoughts, but then you have to ask those questions, which I really like. It's my favorite part about this series. If you don't know what it's about at all, you're following a man named Sir Conrad von Valt. You are following him through the lens of his protege named Helena. So she's actually telling you the story. And there's a lot of looking back on the events of the present day that you're getting. So in actuality, Helena is telling you about these events. So you know that she comes out of it, but there's this sense of foreboding because the way that she occasionally breaks in and is like, but we never knew actually how dangerous it could be. It's not quite that cheesy, but something to that effect where you're like, oh, what's gonna happen? And so it creates this sense of dread throughout the book, which I also really like. And this individual, though, Sir Conrad von Valt, is judge, jury, detective, and executioner all in one, and thus he has so much power, and he has to try to be very principled, but he is really put to the test, as is Helena as his protege. And in the second book, you're starting to see more of the magical components. There's sort of a necromancy aspect to the book, and really, honestly, you start leaning into horror elements as well. There's some things in there that when you really think about it, you're like, this is terrifying and awful. I don't want to think about this anymore. And so I'm really excited for the third book, as I'm pretty sure it's going to expand on that element. But anyway, I thought it was great. There's the occasional funny moment that reminds me a little bit, I've said in the past, of some of Joe Abercrombie's humor, where it's a little bit morbid, but also you're like, oh, teehee, that was pretty funny. So anyway, really liked this book, and now I'm very excited for that last installment. Next up, so different, we have Bookshops and Bone Dust. This is basically a hug of a book. It is almost leaning into, you could almost argue like fan service, even though that's not the right way to describe this, but It's a book that's like, are you a bookworm? Do you like bookstores? Do you like feeling cozy? Well, here you go. That's sort of what Bookshops and Bone Dust is. It is a prequel to Legends and Lattes. And aside from the very end, you technically could read this first. The very end kind of references the events that you get in Legends and Lattes. But if you happen to have accidentally read them out of order or something, I don't think it's the end of the world. Well, it's obviously not the end of the world, but you know what I mean. So the setup in this one is you are looking at Viv, our orc of the story, as she is starting her career, and she's starting her career with an injury. So she has to heal up in this tiny little coastal town, and she is bored out of her mind, and she sort of befriends this bookshop owner whose bookshop nobody ever really visits and nobody comes to, and Viv finds herself wanting to help out as best she can, but maybe the people that put Viv in this place and that injured her, maybe that threat's not exactly gone. And so as Viv is starting to care about this bookshop owner, as well as some other people in this little town, she is realizing that there might be a threat to all of them in their little peaceful corner of the world. So it's really cute. It was adorable. The first one was adorable too. There are romantic subplots in both of these, Legends and Lattes and Bookshops and Bone Dust, but I would not say that they are fantasy romance by any means. But the subplots are really cute as well, I thought, in both of them. I thought they were both handled really well. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel after getting a romantic subplot in Legends and Lattes to get one here, because I was thinking like, well, I don't want to say too much else, but then the way it was done was quite lovely and sweet and kind of emotional at the same time. Anyway, I thought it was great. I also highly recommend the audiobook, as it is narrated by the author, and he is a great narrator. I believe he actually did narration before writing, and his narration is wonderful. Moving on now, the last three were all, actually now I'm thinking about it, these have all been some form of a sequel. Bookshops and Bone Dust was a prequel, Tyranny of Faith was a second book, and the next three are all second books as well. Those next three would be Ruthless Vows, Map of the Otherlands, and Cage of Dreams. And I would say Ruthless Vows for me, and honestly all three of these were not maybe as strong as the first books, in my opinion. I liked the first books more. I think making you care about the characters and these worlds was great. And the second ones expanded on them, but maybe just weren't quite as strong. And I'll start with Ruthless Vows. I think the end of this one was very good. This duology follows these individuals who are rival writers, journalists, and our main character decides that she is done trying to basically compete for this position as a columnist. She's instead going to go to the front lines and try to find her missing soldier brother and find out what happened to him, but also, as much as possible, accurately depict what's going on in this war that it feels like she is not allowed to speak the truth about. And I think that this book is really powerful, absolutely fantastic. The relationship building is great. Second book sort of takes a plot element of the first and sort of reverses it. And luckily it didn't last so long that it started to drag, but I still think that while I appreciated this mirroring, I think it was still maybe not as charming as it was in the first one, given that it is sort of a repeat. It did not by any means make the book suffer or anything like that. I just think that maybe that was one of the reasons why it wasn't as strong for me. I still liked the relationship building in this, and I liked the main characters fighting for what they believed in. I think it was very inspirational. And it was kind of nice to see characters who, as much as I love the awesome fighter character and story, the warrior type characters, the magic wielders, it was kind of cool to just see two people be heroes by speaking the truth and being brave. I thought that that was really well done. Anyway, Ruthless Vows is the end of this duology, so we're complete with this story. It's very good, and I would definitely highly recommend this duology, even if you don't find that you tend to read YA as much. It's not to say it's not YA or that it actually leans into adult. I just think that these themes, a lot of it transcends age range. Next up, Map of the Otherlands. This is almost the reverse. I think this is considered adult fantasy, and I'd say if you like a lot of YA, then this one actually might be really appealing to you. The first book, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, I think had a few things going for it that this next one did not as strongly. So in the first one, you're following our main character, Emily Wilde, as she is trying to document the Fae in this one Nordic region. And in doing so, she has to push outside of her comfort zone and her basically very shy, introverted ways to try and befriend the locals and thus learn more about the Fae in this region, as the locals are the ones that have a lot of the stories, or sort of the keepers of this history that they're a little reserved about and don't openly share with strangers, especially one that seems kind of cold to their eyes. So she has to learn how to actually communicate and exist among other people because she is so dedicated to her craft and to academia. And alongside her in doing her research is her endearing but annoying coworker, Wendell Bambleby, and the two of them work together to discover more about the Fae. And one of the things that the first book did so well, I thought, was her relationship with the village people, you could say, because they are living in these really small villages, the townsfolk type of people. And the second one, I think we missed that a little bit. We got more into her relationship with Wendell as well as somebody else from the university, and then somebody who she is related to. I actually did really like that relationship quite a bit, but I did miss some of that almost exploration of the human to human connection with people that are very different from you. I did still really like it though. It's so charming, it's so cheeky and delightful. I really like the characters in this. I can't wait for the next one. I do feel like the second one, almost similar to Ruthless Vows, borrowed some things from the first and how it played out. And I was sort of hoping we would get to a certain place that we did not get to, I would say, or maybe we didn't spend much time with. And I was hoping we would have gotten more of that in the second one. I'm thinking we're gonna get more of it in the third. As a result, it did kind of make it feel like it was being pulled a little stretched out, and that's probably those couple things I mentioned are the main reason it wasn't as strong as the first one for me, but I still loved it. I had such a good time with it. It kind of felt like coming home after having some that I picked up this quarter that I was like, oh, that was okay, or that wasn't really for me. To come back to this one, it was like, yay, I love it. So I do think it was absolutely delightful and had a great time with it. And then last, Cage of Dreams, so morbid and weird. This is also the end of a duology like Ruthless Vows, and this is just so off the walls and bizarre. It's not going to be for everybody, which is a true statement for every book, but really truly this is a little more niche, and you're basically looking at if Gotham was, I think I've described it before, like tripping on acid because it's such a weird city with crime running rampant, and with mixed in these beings known as nightmares, which are people who have gone to sleep, had a nightmare, and then turned into that nightmare in their world, and then now are wreaking havoc. And then so there are units dedicated to dealing with this problem. And they have pretty much figured out a way to keep people from dreaming and thus potentially having nightmares, but it can still happen from time to time. It has happened in our main character's life. It happened in her own family. So she has grown up terrified of nightmares, and they really can just kill people really easily. It's such a dangerous world. And so in this second installment, you're exploring what if people try to find a way to profit off of the creation of nightmares. What would that look like? And of course that would happen in a city filled with slimy people. And this series is so, I really want to emphasize, this duology is so weird, super morbid. It can be very randomly violent at times, and then also really funny. And I think that was true of the second one. I do think that the second one was a little repetitive at times with some of our internal monologue. I think there was a fine balance because on one hand, our character clearly has PTSD, and she has to often sort of talk herself through things. And I think that was important to show. I just think some of the times it would happen so close to another time, and it would be almost not verbatim the same internal monologue, you could say, but it was close to where I think there could have been ways around it where we kind of like, oh, I ran through my mantra again, or I had to talk through, and then that way it's not expanded too much. But that's really the only reason that I liked it a little less maybe than the first one. I think this duology is super funny. So very different also, so unique. And I guess you could almost call it world building with the nightmares is really interesting to dissect. So really love this duology. There was a lot of other books that I really enjoyed that I got around to and was able to discuss with all of you in that first quarter. But these ones I think were the top for me. And if you are interested, like I said before, in hearing thoughts about any of these, I'll have new releases wrap-ups, and then if I've done any spoiler discussions or non-spoiler reviews or anything like that dedicated to any one particular book, I'll have those linked as well. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Let me know, have you picked any of these books up? What were your thoughts on them? What were some new fantasy books that you picked up this first quarter that you really, really loved? I would love to know. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.